It was a crisp October morning in 1975, the kind where the sunlight filters through the stained glass windows of Briarwood's small-town church, casting colorful patterns on the worn wooden pews. Deacon Matthew Calloway arrived early, as he always did, carrying the week's offerings, a mix of cash, checks, and coins that the congregation had donated to support the church, its repairs, and families in need. He moved quietly, his steps echoing against the empty hall, while the smell of polished wood and incense lingered in the air. No one suspected that this ordinary Sunday would mark the beginning of a mystery that would haunt the town for decades. Matthew had been a trusted figure in Briarwood for years. Known for his pious demeanor and steady hand with church finances, he was the kind of man the townsfolk believed could never do wrong. Children waved at him on the streets, and elders nodded respectfully when he passed by. But that Sunday, as he carefully counted and sorted the offerings, something unseen seemed to stir in the corners of the sanctuary, a tension that Matthew himself might have felt but never spoke of. After the service, he loaded the collection into his car, a modest late-60s sedan parked behind the church. The plan was simple: deposit the funds at the bank, make a note in the ledger, and return before lunch. But hours passed, and Matthew never returned. Parishioners who noticed his absence began whispering, growing anxious. The bank had no record of his visit, and the car remained parked exactly where he left it. It was as though he had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his footsteps and the faint scent of his cologne. Authorities arrived quickly, combing the nearby streets and wooded areas that bordered Briarwood. They found no trace of Matthew. His wallet, keys, and even his shoes were gone from the car. The money, nearly $18,000, an enormous sum at the time, had disappeared as if swallowed by the earth. There were no fingerprints suggesting a struggle, no signs of a break-in, no witnesses who had seen anyone enter or exit the church during the critical hours. The case became a riddle that confounded even seasoned investigators. Rumors erupted almost immediately. Some claimed Matthew had planned a secret getaway, fleeing with the church funds to start a new life far away. Others whispered darker possibilities, that someone in town had forced him to disappear or worse. Children stopped running through the churchyard, and neighbors glanced nervously at one another, as though the very walls of Briarwood might be hiding the truth. Yet, despite the growing speculation, one fact remained undeniable. Deacon Matthew Calloway had vanished without a trace, leaving the small town and the church he served in stunned silence. After Matthew Calloway disappeared, the ripples of his absence spread far beyond the church walls. His wife, Margaret, was left alone to raise their 6-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, in a town that no longer whispered kindly about the family. Gossip traveled fast in Briarwood. Neighbors speculated about hidden debts, secret enemies, and even supernatural explanations. Every time Margaret stepped outside, eyes followed her, brimming with suspicion or pity. For Elizabeth, life became a constant negotiation with judgment, as she learned to navigate a world where her father's name was synonymous with betrayal. School, which should have been a sanctuary for a young child, turned into a minefield of cruel whispers and stares. Classmates would snicker whenever her last name was mentioned, labeling her with nicknames like Preacher's Thief or Money's Daughter. Teachers, though more careful, couldn't hide the occasional raised eyebrow or the knowing look when church collections were discussed. Elizabeth grew up in a bubble of embarrassment and resentment, feeling the weight of a crime she didn't commit, carried by a man who may have been innocent. The shame of her father's disappearance seeped into every corner of her childhood. Despite the town's assumptions, Margaret clung to the belief that Matthew had not stolen from God. She insisted that he was a good man, someone who would never betray the church or its congregation. "People will talk," she would say to Elizabeth, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "But the truth doesn't change just because they refuse to see it." Margaret's unwavering faith in her husband became both a shield and a burden, teaching Elizabeth to question the stories around her but also leaving her isolated from the world that judged her so harshly. Family gatherings were quiet, neighbors avoided conversation, and the shadow of Matthew's disappearance loomed over the household like an unshakable cloud. As the years passed, the town slowly moved on. The church appointed a new deacon, Sunday services continued, and the scandal faded from the front pages of the local paper. But for Elizabeth and Margaret, the past never truly left. Each anniversary of Matthew's disappearance brought a reminder of the unanswered questions and the whispers that still lingered in the hallways of Briarwood. Elizabeth carried the dual burden of pride in her father's character and the weight of public suspicion, learning early that truth and perception often live in entirely different worlds. The unresolved mystery shaped Elizabeth's personality and her understanding of justice. She became cautious, perceptive, and fiercely protective of her family's story. The absence of closure gnawed at her, planting seeds of determination that would later bloom in her daughter, Harper. In her quiet moments, Elizabeth often wondered if Matthew had truly vanished by choice, or if some sinister force within the town or the church had taken him away. That lingering doubt became a silent inheritance, a mystery that demanded attention from the next generation. Fast forward 48 years. Elizabeth's daughter, Harper Calloway, had grown up in Atlanta, far from the quiet streets of Briarwood. She was 29 years old, a journalist with a sharp mind and a curiosity that often got her into trouble. Harper had always been fascinated by the stories her mother told. Tales of a father she never knew, of a town quick to judge, and a mystery that had refused to die. While her friends joked about family secrets, Harper felt the weight of something unresolved, a puzzle that needed to be solved. The whispers of the past were calling her back home. Harper's interest in the story wasn't just professional. Growing up, she had pieced together fragments of old letters, photographs, and cryptic comments from her grandmother. Each fragment hinted at a truth the town had buried, a version of her grandfather Matthew Calloway that no one else dared to speak aloud. She spent hours researching old newspaper archives, scanning through yellowed clippings that painted Matthew alternately as a saint and a sinner. The contradictions gnawed at her, and the more she dug, the more obsessed she became with uncovering what really happened that Sunday morning in 1975. The turning point came with her grandmother's passing. Margaret left Harper the old Calloway house on the outskirts of Briarwood, a house abandoned for decades, standing silent at the edge of the woods like a monument to forgotten secrets. Inside, among faded curtains and stacks of dust-covered boxes, Harper found a single handwritten note tucked beneath a loose floorboard. The message was cryptic but clear: the truth is still here. Look beneath what was built to hide it. Harper's heart raced. For the first time, she felt a tangible connection to the mystery that had shadowed her family for nearly half a century. That note was enough to set Harper in motion. She felt an urgency she had never experienced before, the kind that grips a journalist not just with curiosity, but with a sense of destiny. She packed her bags and returned to Briarwood, knowing that the quiet town held more than memories. It held answers, waiting in the dark corners of the past. The familiar streets now felt charged with tension, every brick in the old buildings seeming to whisper warnings. Harper knew she was walking into a story much larger, and much darker, than she could have imagined. As Harper began exploring the Calloway house, she realized the building itself seemed to hold clues. Every layer of dust, every creaking floorboard, every corner of shadowed space felt like a fragment of a hidden story. The attic, the basement, the long-forgotten closets, they weren't just storage. They were time capsules, remnants of a life her grandfather once lived and a secret the town had desperately tried to erase. Harper's pulse quickened with each discovery, a mixture of fear and excitement. She could sense that the truth was close, but so was danger, lurking in the echoes of a past that refused to rest. The Calloway house smelled of old wood, mildew, and decades of forgotten memories. Harper stepped cautiously across the creaking floors, her flashlight cutting through the dim light of the attic. Dust motes danced in the beam, like tiny spirits suspended in the air. Boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls threatened to tumble at the slightest touch, but Harper's hands were steady. She was searching not for trinkets, but for answers, clues that might finally unravel the mystery that had haunted her family for nearly 50 years. After hours of sifting through yellowed letters, brittle photographs, and old family Bibles, Harper's eyes caught something unusual tucked behind a stack of furniture. It was a roll of blueprints, tied with fraying string and hidden away as though someone had gone to great lengths to keep them secret. Her hands trembled as she unrolled them on a dusty table. At first glance, they looked like ordinary plans of the Briarwood church, but Harper quickly noticed discrepancies. Rooms were marked differently, spaces existed that had long since been walled over, and there were annotations in Matthew Calloway's familiar handwriting, small, precise letters, almost too careful to be ordinary. One particular room stood out, a small rectangular space behind the church's original storage area. Unlike the other rooms, this one wasn't labeled with a conventional purpose. Instead, it bore the initials MC, her grandfather's. Harper's stomach tightened. The hidden room appeared to have been deliberately erased from the church's current floor plans. Whoever had built over it didn't want anyone to know it existed. Harper ran her fingers along the lines of the blueprint, tracing every wall, every door, every shadowed corner. She could almost feel her grandfather's presence, as if he had left this map intentionally, a breadcrumb trail for someone brave enough to follow. The blueprints revealed more than just a hidden room. They suggested a story of secrecy, planning, and foresight. Harper noticed peculiar details: reinforced walls, tiny ventilation ducts, and a small hatch that didn't exist in the modern church. Whoever had built this space had intended it to remain invisible. Questions swirled in Harper's mind. Why had her grandfather created it? Was it a refuge, a hiding place, or a trap? And most importantly, had Matthew known he might never leave it? Each question seemed more terrifying than the last, the weight of the past pressing down on Harper like a physical force. As night fell outside, Harper sat cross-legged on the attic floor, blueprints spread before her, and realized this was the turning point. She wasn't just uncovering old architecture. She was uncovering a mystery deliberately buried by time and fear. Every shadowed corner of the Calloway house seemed alive now, whispering secrets she could almost hear. Harper knew she couldn't leave this unanswered. Whatever her grandfather had tried to hide, it was waiting to be found, and the hidden room marked MC was the key. The journey into the past was just beginning. Harper returned to the church the very next day, her mind buzzing with the secrets hidden in the blueprints. The building looked familiar, but now every corner, every hallway seemed different, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for her to uncover the truth. The storage room indicated on the old plans had been modified over the years. Walls had been moved, ceilings lowered, and shelves installed. Yet something about the space felt wrong. Harper ran her hands along the plaster, tapping gently. The sound it made was hollow in one particular section, unlike the solid thud of the rest of the wall. Her pulse quickened. She circled the room, flashlight in hand, tracing the edges of the walls and floorboards. Dust lay thick in the corners, untouched for decades, but there were faint scuff marks along the baseboards, irregular, almost deliberate. Someone had tried to hide or move something here. Harper crouched and pressed her ear against the wall. A faint echo answered back, a hollow resonance that no ordinary wall should make. Her breath caught in her throat. The blueprints had been right. There was a space behind this wall, a space the modern church had tried to erase. The air in the room seemed colder now, heavier. Harper could feel the weight of decades pressing down on her. She noticed a small seam running along the plaster, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The craftsmanship was old, different from the newer renovations. Whoever had built this wall had done so meticulously, hiding it in plain sight. Harper's fingers traced the seam, following it like a map, and a shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't just a wall. It was a barrier, a deliberately concealed secret waiting to be uncovered. Every detail added to the tension. Nails protruded slightly at odd intervals, the wood behind the plaster felt thicker than normal, and there was a faint odor, metallic, like rust, mixed with decades of damp wood. Harper's journalist instincts screamed at her that this was more than just a curiosity. Something, or someone, had been trapped behind this wall. The thought was chilling, but it pushed her forward, past fear, into a determination to uncover the truth no matter how horrifying it might be. As she studied the wall, Harper realized the implications. The church had existed for decades over this hidden void, its congregants unknowingly worshipping above a space that was deliberately concealed. Every Sunday sermon, every collection of offerings, every prayer had taken place above a mystery someone had worked tirelessly to keep buried. Harper's heartbeat quickened, the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She understood that uncovering this wall's secret would change everything she thought she knew about her grandfather, the church, and the town of Briarwood. The hidden room wasn't just a relic of the past. It was the heart of a story that had been silenced for nearly 50 years. The next morning, Harper returned to the church with a contractor she trusted, under the pretense of inspecting some structural repairs. She couldn't risk doing this alone, not knowing what might be behind that hollow wall. The drywall came off slowly, dust billowing into the air like the ghosts of forgotten years. With each panel removed, the shadow of a hidden room became clearer. Harper's hands shook, a mixture of fear and anticipation tightening her chest. This was it, the place her grandfather had marked with his initials almost 50 years ago. As the final panel came loose, Harper's flashlight illuminated the narrow doorway behind it. It was small, barely 6 feet wide, and smelled of old wood, mildew, and something metallic she couldn't immediately place. The air felt thick, as though it had been trapped for decades. Harper knelt and peered inside, seeing the contours of a room she never knew existed. Old metal lockboxes lined the walls, stacked in uneven piles, and ledgers lay scattered across the floor. The faint outline of a skeleton caught her eye, slumped against the far wall. Harper froze. She had expected secrets, but not this. The skeleton wore a faded deacon's jacket, Matthew Calloway. Harper's stomach dropped. This was her grandfather, the man everyone believed had run away with the church funds. The reality was far more horrifying. Someone had deliberately concealed him here, sealing him away in the hidden room. The dust-covered ledgers told a story of careful bookkeeping, tracking donations and expenditures, but they were more than numbers. They were evidence, proof of what Matthew had known, and proof of the danger that had caught up to him. Harper's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing like a drum in the narrow, shadowed room. As she carefully examined the lockboxes, Harper noticed some were still tightly sealed while others had rusted hinges and signs of forced entry. Papers crumbled as she lifted them, revealing records of church donations, receipts, and coded annotations in Matthew's handwriting. The hidden room had been more than a storage space. It was a vault of truth. Whoever had trapped Matthew wanted these secrets buried forever. Harper could feel the gravity of it pressing down, the realization that her grandfather had been silenced not because he stole, but because he knew too much. The room itself seemed to pulse with the weight of the past. Every shadow, every cobweb, every creak of the floorboards felt alive, as if the house itself were aware that its deepest secret had finally been uncovered. Harper's flashlight flickered slightly, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The discovery was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, proof that the mystery of 1975 was far darker than anyone in Briarwood could have imagined. The hidden room wasn't just a room. It was a tomb, a ledger, and a message all in one. And Harper knew, in that bone-chilling moment, that what she had found would rewrite everything her family, and the town, thought they knew about Matthew Calloway. Harper's hands shook as she carefully opened one of the lockboxes. Inside were stacks of cash, neatly bundled but yellowed with age. Her eyes widened. This was the missing church money, untouched and preserved exactly as it had been when her grandfather vanished. Every horror she had imagined collided with the surreal reality before her. Matthew Calloway had not run away. He had been guarding the church's funds with his life, trapped in the hidden room for decades while the town labeled him a thief. Harper's stomach churned as the truth began to crystallize. She sifted through the ledgers next, each page a revelation. Matthew had meticulously documented the church's finances, but among the numbers were notes, coded and urgent, exposing discrepancies and fraudulent activity within the church leadership. Donations had been siphoned off, redirected to private accounts, and laundered through shell organizations. Names appeared again and again, including the senior pastor at the time, and 2 prominent city officials. Matthew had uncovered corruption that threatened powerful people, and in doing so, had made himself a target. Harper realized the depth of the danger her grandfather had faced. A chill ran down her spine as she read further. Matthew had recorded warnings, dates, and meetings he had overheard, evidence that someone had discovered his intentions to expose the truth. The final ledger entry was hastily scrawled, the ink smeared in panic. "If I disappear, the truth must remain. MC." Harper's hands trembled as she traced the letters. He had known he might not survive, and he had planned for someone, anyone, brave enough to continue his work. The horror of that realization sank in. Matthew hadn't just been a victim. He had been a sentinel, silenced because he dared to confront corruption hidden beneath the sanctity of the church. The room itself seemed almost alive with the weight of decades-long secrets. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, dust falling like snow from the ceiling beams. Harper noticed scratches on the inside of the wall, jagged marks that suggested someone had struggled against the confinement. She traced her fingers over them, feeling the desperation frozen in time. Every mark told a story of fear, resistance, and a fight against injustice that had been violently cut short. The room was more than a storage space. It was a tomb, a ledger, and a crime scene all at once. As Harper pieced it together, the terrifying implications became undeniable. The town that had condemned Matthew as a thief had been worshipping over a grave of truth for decades. The powerful individuals responsible for silencing him had long passed, but their legacy of deception had been preserved, buried beneath sermons, hymns, and prayers. Harper felt the magnitude of her discovery settle in her chest like a stone. This was more than a story. It was a revelation, a reckoning, and a warning. The sins of the past had been hidden, but finally, they were exposed, and the truth demanded to be heard. Harper stepped back from the hidden room, her flashlight trembling in her hand. She had uncovered what no one in Briarwood had dared to confront for nearly 50 years. The truth about her grandfather, the stolen funds, and the corruption that had festered in the shadows of the church. The town had believed Matthew Calloway was a thief, but in reality, He had been a guardian, silenced for daring to expose the darkness beneath the sanctuary. The weight of the discovery pressed down on her. Every sermon, every hymn, every Sunday gathering had unknowingly taken place above a secret no one was meant to see. Harper realized that this revelation wasn't just about the past. It was a reckoning, a moment that demanded the town face what had been hidden for decades. She felt a shiver run down her spine as the thought hit her. Justice had been denied for nearly half a century. Harper looked at the skeleton, the ledgers, and the lockboxes. Her grandfather's message was clear. The truth could never be buried forever. Someone had finally found it, someone willing to confront it. The air in the room felt charged, almost alive, as if Matthew's presence lingered, acknowledging that his secrets were no longer his burden alone. The shadows seemed to whisper his warning. God sees everything, and so will the world. As she stepped out into the light of the old church, Harper knew her life, and the town of Briarwood, would never be the same. The story she now carried was bigger than her, bigger than the church, bigger than the whispers of suspicion that had haunted her family for decades. And yet, with that knowledge came a terrifying responsibility, to reveal the truth, no matter the cost. Because some secrets, no matter how long they've been hidden, have a way of finding their way into the light, and when they do, the world can never look away.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.